We talked about how Jesus was on the other side of the Jordan baptizing. He went away again across, he is Jesus, went away again across the Jordan to the place where John had been baptizing at first, and there he remained. And then he came to him, and they said, John did no sign, but everything that John said about this man was true. And many believed in him there. And then we talked about how that those converts were likely the fruit of John's ministry, and that it is our job to sow the seed, is to tell people about Jesus. It's not our job to make sure they're saved. That's their job. That's their responsibility. And we may never see the fruits of our labor. We may never find out that we had an impact on someone. I had an uncle who led a pretty colorful life, but I didn't know until his funeral some of the wonderful things he had done for people. And it was kind of sad to me that all I saw of him was not as positive. But we may never see it. And then he went to Bethany. We talked about how the burial practices of ancient Judaism, and saw this picture. And now we move on to the story of Lazarus. Now a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. Now this doesn't connect the dots, but they are two sisters and a brother. They are siblings. It was Mary who anointed the Lord with ointment and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was ill. So the sisters sent to him, saying, Lord, he whom you love is ill. But when Jesus heard it, he said, This illness does not lead to death. It is for the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. So we talked about how the ways of God are not always our ways, but they are always perfect, and they are always best for us. So we need to trust in them. And then we talked about how Jesus loved the family at Bethany, how he knew that he would die, that Lazarus would die, and yet he still stayed for 2 days. And it was so that you may know, that they might know, those people might know that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that you might have life in his name. So now we're going to talk about the weakness of the disciples. We're going to read verses 7 through 16. Then after this, he said to the disciples, Let us go to Judea again. The disciples said to him, Rabbi, the Jews were just now seeking to stone you, and are you going there again? Jesus answered, Are there not 12 hours in the day? If anyone walks in the day, he does not stumble because he sees the light of this world. What he's talking about is not a day, a 24-hour day. He's talking about 12 hours of sunlight, ostensibly. But if anyone walks in the night, he stumbles because the light is not in him. After saying these things, he said to them, Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I go to awaken him. The disciples said to him, Lord, if he has fallen asleep, he will recover. Now Jesus had spoken of his death, but they thought that he meant taking rest in sleep. That misunderstanding again, right? Then Jesus told them plainly, Lazarus is dead, and for your sake I am glad that I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him. So Thomas called the twin, said to his fellow disciples, Let us go, so that we may die with him. We have no idea how he said that, but we'll talk more about that in the insert. So the disciples said three things in this passage that revealed. I don't know if weakness is really the correct thing to say, but I'd rather do those rather you be wherever you are, be all there. Gosh, it's a Monday to do that. Possibly these are true. I'm not sure they all are, but the first one is lack of courage. Um, and they were afraid to go. Maybe, I don't know. We don't know how Thomas said that. It could have been, well, then let's go with them so we can die, or it might be sarcastic, right? Oh, great, yeah, let's go with them. We'll die. We don't know. It's possible, but I don't think we can know for sure. Um, I understand being afraid to go, and I think I've mentioned this to you before. All my Christian journey, from maybe even before I came to Christ, but definitely after, until 2008, I thought that if I really just totally gave my life over to the Lord, I'd end up in Africa. I didn't want to end up in Africa because snakes, and nearly all of them are poisonous. And I hate snakes. I may be just as afraid of a garter snake than I am a rattlesnake. Maybe not, but pretty close. Pretty close. And there was a song when I was in college called "Please Don't Send Me to Africa," and it's about this tongue in cheek. It's supposed to be funny by a guy named Scott Wesley Brown, and he's telling God that he doesn't want to go to Africa because he's afraid to go to Africa, and all my friends thought it was funny, and I was like, oh, that's like my theme song right there. I don't think it's funny at all. And God did a work in my heart as my church partnered with a man named Novice Kalunga, who's a modern day Apostle Paul. He goes out into the bush of Africa. He's 70 years old. He goes out into the bush of Africa. He preaches the gospel. He'll go to a village. He'll preach the gospel. People will get saved. He'll stay with them. He'll teach them. And then when they're ready, he chooses a man of understanding to be the pastor of that church. And then he goes on to the next village. And so one of our things that we did in Africa was to train those pastors because there's no way they can go to seminary. There is a seminary in Lusaka, the capital city, but they can't get there and they can't leave their families. They're the breadwinners. Their families will starve. They can't take their families with them. They don't have the money to do that. So we bring seminary to them. My role, spoiler alert, I did go to Zambia 3 times. My role was to teach their wives the Bible. And then the other thing was the orphans. Now, in Africa, and probably in most on most continents that are third world continents, largely, an orphan is defined. They have single orphans and double orphans. A double orphan has lost both parents, and that's what we think of as an orphan. But in Africa, a single orphan has lost either mother or father. And here's the thing: if they've lost mother, they've lost their caregiver. And if they lose father, they lose their breadwinner, right? So either way, this child is in peril. And the orphanage is not what we think of an orphanage. It's an orphan care center, and it's right by a school. The kids go to school. They come first before school. They get a breakfast. They get to play. They go to school. They come get lunch, and then after school, they get some help with classwork and all of that, and then they go home to whatever home is, and it was as our church was telling people about all this, that they put the pictures of orphans up on the screen. And looking at those pictures, God took me from a person who was scared to death to go to Africa to one who was begging God for the opportunity to go. And I did. And don't let fear keep you from what God has. He will be with you all the way. Did I see a snake? Yeah, I did. Last time I was there. One of the times I didn't go, I heard that they killed a black mamba. We were walking when I saw the snake, big snake. I was with my friend Marjorie, who is African, Zambian, and my friend Mike, who's an American. And we're walking along, and of course, I am talking because that's what I do best. And all of a sudden, Marjorie goes, snake. And there's this gray, huge snake, like right in front of us. And he's headed toward a hole. And Mike said, "Should I kill him?" He sees a snake, and he goes, boom, and he cuts it. And it got down into the hole, but he cut it almost in half. So I'm sure the snake died. And that was one less snake that might bite the children. Mike went home and because he got a close-up view of it, he looked it up, and it was a spitting cobra. So yeah. So I could tell you more stories about that. The main thing is, don't let fear stop. God has something for you. Go for it. Go for it. I didn't see this coming, being a Bible teacher. And I'm glad I didn't let fear stop. So yeah, their lack of courage, and then also their lack of understanding. They don't really understand what he's talking about. I'm not going to talk much because I would call it misunderstanding. Because if you told somebody, or somebody told you he fell asleep, you wouldn't immediately go, "Oh, really? He died?" You wouldn't do that, right? Because you think he fell asleep, and that's what they thought. And then finally, their lack of faith. But we don't know how Thomas said, "And let's go and die with him." So maybe a lack of faith. I think mostly it's just misunderstanding yet again in the gospel. When we get to heaven, we'll find out. So then let's talk about the wisdom of Martha. The wisdom of Martha. Now, when Jesus came, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb 4 days. Bethany was near Jerusalem, about 2 miles off, and many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them concerning their brother. So when Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and met him, but Mary remained seated in the house. Martha said to Jesus, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died, but even now I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give you." Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha said to him, "I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day." Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live, and everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this?" She said to him, "Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who is coming into the world." So, it says she believes Christ will raise Lazarus. I don't think that's right. Hi, how may I help you? Good, good. I don't think she has any framework to think that. I mean, if someone said to you that he will rise again, what would be your first thought? Like somebody's going to actually raise him from the dead out of the casket? Would that be your first thought? No, and it wouldn't be hers either, because the Jews also believed a final resurrection, and that's what he's talking about when he says, "I am the resurrection." He's saying life is in my hands. and the final resurrection is in my hands. We'll talk more about this, but I don't think she could have thought that. I don't think Martha knew enough to know that.
Does the book like she believes like in the resurrection because it says does not comprehend when? Doesn't it mean like she believes like in the last says I know he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day.
Right, but I think the curriculum is saying that Jesus will raise Lazarus now, and even that part of that verse shows that that's probably not true. But Jesus is going to do that. We know that afterward, but before that, I don't think that could have been part of what she was doing. So she doesn't comprehend when. In other words, that he's going to, according to the curriculum, that he's going to raise her right now. And I don't think she could realize that. Then this part I think is the harshest part, and we'll read it, but we'll pretty much dismiss it. When she said this, she went and called her sister Mary, saying in private, "The teacher is here and is calling for you." And when she heard it, she rose quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet come into the village, but was still in the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who were with her in the house consoling her saw Mary rise quickly and go out, they followed her, supposing that she was going to the tomb to weep there. Now when Mary came to where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet, saying to him, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." So the witches of Mary, you can fill in there. She doesn't consider Jesus' power to raise Lazarus. I don't think she had a filter from which to understand that, right? I don't. I think that's too harsh on her. Yeah, I think it's here. They call her an if only Christian. If only you had been here. If only I would have done that. If only, and that's true. There are people who are if only people. They don't live the life that God is giving them because they just keep looking to the past and go, well, if only I would have gone to college, if only I would have married that person, if only, and it's ridiculous and it's unproductive to think that way. But I don't think that's Mary. I don't think that's what Mary's saying. Because both, like in the Greek, what the two sisters say is almost identical. I think there's one word flip. So they say the same thing. So why are we talking about the wisdom of Martha and the witches of Mary? They say the same thing to Jesus, and it's true, right? They're expressing faith. If you would have been here, I don't think they're saying you should have gotten here sooner. I think they're saying if you would have been here, he'd be alive. You would have healed him. They're expressing faith in it. I think both of them are, because they say really almost the exact same thing. I'm going to fly through this because I'm going to land. I got a lot of notes here that I'm not going to do because I'm going to do it. I'm going to land in the insert on this pretty hard. So the weeping of Jesus. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and greatly troubled. And he said, "Where have you laid him?" They said to him, "Lord, come and see." Jesus wept. Everybody wants that to be the verse, the Bible verse memory, but we'll never have that one. So the Jews said, "See how he loved him." But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man also have kept this man from dying?" Then Jesus, deeply moved again, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone lay against it. So Jesus cries. He's weeping. It's not just a little bit of crying. He's weeping. Why is he weeping? Does he not know he's about to raise Lazarus? Huh?
Like or does someone else benefit?
Identifying with that. That's one possible answer, yeah.
That was like the book, I like the wish thing. Like, like thinking about it, like, oh, you shouldn't be here.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what are you crying about that? And like, I don't think he is. Crying about that, like, with that, for them, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll talk about it next week. I'm not going to answer it now, but we're going to talk about it next week. And this next one, they're spot on. And I'm also not going to talk about it now because I want to talk about it next week. His anger. When it says he was deeply moved, he was angry. Wow. And we'll talk more about what that word means next week. Yeah.
I think you might have been weeping for not necessarily specifically for the death of Lazarus, but like for our world being a broken world, and this isn't the world that he had intended it to be. And I think that might have been why he was weeping.
I think that's a really good answer. Yeah. Yeah, and we'll talk more about it.
And that would explain the anger too.
So we'll do an insert, and I will talk a good deal more about it. But I'll just give you this little teaser. There is such a thing as righteous anger. When I hear the stories of my campers, because every single one of those children has been put out of their home and put into foster care. Some are still in foster care, some have been adopted, a few have been put back in their parents' care. But when you hear those stories, when you hear what those children have suffered, there's something wrong with you if that doesn't make you. Now, what I've learned over almost 20 years of going to Royal Family Kids Camp is that behind every sad story is a sad story. And if I met their parents that I'm angry at, I'd find out that their story is just as sad as their child's story. If you have really good parents, go home and hug them and tell them safe parents, because not everybody gets that. So we'll talk about Christ's anger and what he's angry about, but we'll wait and do that next week. Then the words of Jesus. Jesus said, "Take away the stone." Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, "Lord, by this time there will be an odor, for he has been dead 4 days." Jesus said to her, "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone, and Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this on account of the people standing around, that they may believe that you sent me." When he had said these things, he cried out in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The man who had died came out, his hands and feet bound with linen strips, and his face wrapped with a cloth. Jesus said to them, "Unbind him and let him go." So those words, Jesus healed him. Jesus raised him just with his words. How powerful were his words. That's all that was needed. And his word saves people still today. And then the will of the people, it just says that some believed in him, right? And others narked on him. Others went to the Jewish leadership and said, "Hey, we can help you find Jesus." How could you see that miracle and then rat on it? That doesn't make any sense. But there's an old saying that says, "There is none so blind than he who refuses to see." And I think that's true, and I think that's the case. So that is the end of the curriculum lecture. As I told you, we will have an insert, and I gave you those questions yesterday, so you have those for Monday. I am also going to give you the quiz, the chapter quiz, and that will also be due on Monday.
Yes. Oh.
Yeah, she is.
That's a great thing.